the time is ripe to call on Pan-African women of faith to encourage each other, and particularly to pass on the message what kind of resources and contributions Pan-African women can make to the ecumenical movement, especially in what the transmission from one generation to another is concerned. And she also told me about her research on the legacy of Pan-African women in the history of the ecumenical movement. And I was fascinated about this research she was doing and is still continuing to do. And we thought that this legacy and leadership that Pan-African women have shown from the outset in the ecumenical movement is worth continuing to reflect about, but not only to reflect about, but also to hand over and to translate into action that is based on our faith. From there, we said we need to have a kind of framework. It needs to be embedded in some concrete project. And so I offered to include PAWEEN into the programmatic plans of the Department on Ecumenical Theological Education, for which I became responsible since 2014. And the following year, we had in the chapel where we just have been our very first meeting together with 6 dedicated women, and we decided to launch PAWEEN officially. We stayed together for a couple of days to develop the initial framework and concept for PAWEEN. We shared it also with a few colleagues. I'm happy that Fulata and Nyambura are with us today. Also Josu, who became later on very instrumental when we thought on how to connect it also to other programmatic work in the WCC, notably the work around mission and evangelism and the upcoming World Mission Conference. So we are very grateful also for this cross-programmatic collaboration, which became very visible from the outset. The following year, in 2016, so in fact last year, we had the first major international consultation in Washington, D.C., where more than 100 Pan-African women from different regions came together under the theme of Pan-African Women of Faith, lifting our voices and votes to end hunger and poverty. And there you can already see that we tried to build the thematic concerns around, on the one hand, the fact that we want to emphasize that we are women of faith, that we come from a theological and biblical background, and on the other hand, that we want to be active from this background of faith. We want to contribute to the transformation of society. So PAWEEN is not only an inward-oriented exercise of Pan-African women coming together, surely reflecting on what the particular experience and the particular concerns of Pan-African women are, but also how Pan-African women can contribute to the construction and transformation of the wider society. After the Central Committee meeting of WCC in Trondheim last year, was another important phase in the development of PAWEEN, because we decided to reposition PAWEEN within the pilgrimage of justice and peace. And the Central Committee meeting in Trondheim gave very important impulses for this repositioning, because it offered a kind of theological structure. And we will talk a little bit more about this structure. You have also seen in your documentation the article that Angélique contributed to the International Review of Mission, in which she unfolded this theological structure, and she will speak more to that in a moment. Furthermore, we believe that PAWEEN is, on the one hand, an initiative that is clearly located in a programmatic unit, which is theological education. So it is educational. It is an initiative that can be described also as a learning community. That is very important to us. On the other hand, it is also in a way intersectional, because it also touches upon the areas of advocacy and the struggle for human rights, and therefore it links to the international discourse and initiatives. There we could mention the International Decade for People of African Descent. This initiative started in 2015 as well, and will reach until 2024. We believe that it is important to build alliances from within the ecumenical movement to other faith-based institutions and to the international community. And therefore, in this seminar, we decided to have this focus on the empowerment of Pan-African women in the ecumenical movement, and at the same time to have a perspective on the sustainable development, which is highlighted in the current international discourse, and we will also come back to that and deepen that aspect in a moment. For this time, I would like to hand over to Angélique to continue a little bit further.
Thank you, Amélé, very much. Once again, it is such an honor to see you here in this room, in this space. One of the things I think was mentioned last evening, which I want to reiterate, that this is such a sacred space for us to be in. Yeah. Some of you will know that Dr. Wizertoof, who was the first General Secretary of the World Council of Churches, envisioned that there would be a space like this that would literally bring up new generations of leaders in the ecumenical movement. So you sit in the places of some people who you may know, but may not know, who have sat in this place. One of the persons that comes to mind is Desmond Tutu, who was the head of Faith and Order for World Council of Churches. World leaders have been here. We think about people like Brigadier Baum. We will name more of them as we move along these next few days. But you are in a most sacred space. And we just give thanks to God that at this moment it happens to be us in this sacred space. So I ask you to take very seriously where you are at in terms of this sacred place. This has been a place since after World War II where church leaders have been brought up in the global leadership of the church. And they came here as young people and as older folk, and later became great leaders. So we bless this space of where you are today and give thanks to you. So the next point we want to make is about the article. Amélé, a wonderful colleague, and I just thank her again. Oh, she's such my sister, and all of the core group. We have really become so close in this movement together. And she has given you this background from Busan to Bossey, from Bossey to Washington, from Washington to Bossey. Next year, inshallah, we will be in Arusha. And Yusuf is here, and we are so grateful that he has come. For those of you who don't know, this will also be a historic occasion on the pilgrimage of Pan-African women in Arusha, Tanzania. I think close to 1,500, yes, Yusuf will be there. Am I right about that?
Altogether, the participants will be 1,000.
About 1,000. I knew it was a big number. So about 1,000 will be coming from around the world. This is one of the widest ecumenical moments in the ecumenical movement. Our Catholic brothers and sisters, our evangelical, Pentecostal, mainline, you name it, will be represented at this grand meeting in Arusha. And so that will be another stop on the journey. But now we focus on the article just for a moment. I want to ensure that all of you have this booklet. Okay. If you don't have it, please grab it. It's on the back table in the rear of the room. Again, we have spoken already about the pilgrimage. That is the theme of the World Council of Churches, pilgrimage of justice and peace. From Busan until wherever, I'm very honored to be serving on the Central Committee. Okay, now you will need these papers. They should have been given to you at registration, I think. Yeah. In any case, just to give you a little backdrop again, because this will speak to the paper I'm going to speak to in a moment. Again, from Busan to Bossey, from Bossey to Washington to Bossey, Bossey to Arusha. But this is all part of the 7-year journey that takes place at the World Council of Churches. I've actually been able to serve on the Central Committee a couple of times, so this is my first time around. And what happens is, in the global family, there's about a 7-year period from one assembly to another, and that was in Busan. And the next one, we don't know where it will be, but we will learn more next year when Central Committee meets again. But last year, we were in Trondheim, in Norway. And this is the booklet from Washington, D.C. So we asked you to refer, we will be referring back and forth to that one. That in your papers that you were sent ahead of time, there was an article that I was privileged to write. This is one reason why I mentioned the backdrop. Because this paper comes out of this pilgrimage of Pan-African women within the larger pilgrimage of journey of from justice and peace, okay? So that's the overall theme of the World Ecumenical Movement. Last year in Trondheim, as Amélé has already suggested to you, we were gifted with a presentation from the committee that is working on the pilgrimage for justice and peace. One of my dear colleagues, he and I were on Central Committee last time, Fernando Enns, who's the chairman of that committee, presented, I thought, a wonderful presentation of how to theologically frame the pilgrimage of justice and peace. And so that was adopted last year. Also adopted last year at the Central Committee was the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them. Some of you may already know this, but I'll rehearse it for the benefit of all. Last September, Pope Francis came to New York. Bread for the World was a part of some of this, and kicked off at the United Nations what we now know to be the Sustainable Development Goals. Some of you may know the Millennial Development Goals, the MDGs, that came prior to that. But then in last fall, he came and kicked it off and spoke to the Congress, and we articulated now the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. One of those goals is the empowerment of women. And so to some extent, we are coming under that rubric for the work we are doing this week. That aligned with, since 2014, the International Decade in Solidarity with People of African Descent. For the first time, as I understand, and Falata could tell you more because she works so well in these areas as well, we now have a global forum where people of African descent are coming together. These are all merging into this paper that you have here. It is the backdrop of this paper. I want to go over the outline of the paper and then go quickly to my next points. In the beginning, you have what is called the executive summary or the abstract. It really summarizes really what the paper is about. In the next section, you really have kind of a historical overview of some of the things that I've already articulated. But here in this section, I also go back to the scriptures. Pan-African women have been around since day one, amen?
Yeah.
Like day one. So we think about Zipporah. I mean, we think about others that are in the scriptures. Hagar, for example. So I name a few of those women as far as the Bible. So we're not starting in the Enlightenment period. No, no, no. We're going all the way back to where women of African descent have always, can we say always? Have always been around. And we feel that these stories of the earliest days have not been at the center of Christian life, of Christian history. I went to Yale Divinity School and went to Princeton for my doctorate. I know that we don't do what we ought to do when it comes to the stories and the narrative of women of African descent. When I was at Yale Divinity School, thank God I had Burgess Carr as a professor. He was a former leader of the All Africa Conference churches where I got turned on as a young adult. And I remember I went to him in the classroom and I said, I want to put together, this is before the internet, I will say that. So I want to put together a bibliography of African women in the church. And he looked at me. And he was from Liberia. He says, well, they don't really do that so much. And I said, I would like to do that. And Burgess Carr said to me, okay, go, my sister, just go, you do that. And so that really began my journey. I had just graduated from college. I was 21 at the time. I went straight into graduate studies. And he said, you go, you do that. And so I'm glad, and I want to encourage you, sisters, to encourage your professors and your mentors to do what your heart says do. Mm. Because a lot of them just don't know our story. Mm. And until you push, it will not happen. Mm. So anyway, that's part of what this week is about, empowerment. It's about pushing the envelope when it's uncomfortable. In any case, the first part talks about this biblical heritage. The second part also talks about the growth of Pan-African Christianity and Pan-African women of faith. We are I believe, in a unique moment for Pan-African women to raise their voices. Now, we need to say again, since the scriptures, we have been doing this. This is not new. What is new, I think, are the global dynamics that allow for us to prosper in, I think, some new ways around breaking down the structures, breaking down the systems, and engaging our identity to move our narrative to the center of the ecclesial conversation. We have always been there, but we are committed in this PAWEEN movement to move it to the center of the conversation. Now, for those who may not be as aware, Christianity has moved from the north and from the west. I'm sure maybe of you already know this. In terms of the numbers and the growth of Christianity, it is now in Africa and Latin America, not in the United States or in Europe. It is in Africa and Latin America. And this is part of the wisdom of the CWME conference that is coming in Arusha on next year. And so we want to acknowledge that Christianity itself is moving to the center in the places of African identity. And I'm sure many of you already know that the second most populous area of people of African descent is where? Is where?
Brazil.
Brazil. It is in Brazil. Okay. The first one is the continent. The second one is Brazil. Latin America, Africa is coming. So we are a part of this unique moment of where Christianity itself is moving more to the center by virtue not only of the spirit, but also of the numbers. And we need to accept that as empowerment. So this section speaks to that moment. The next section talks about how last year we dealt with some of the urgencies. Again, PAWEEN is about the structures and moving the issues that we care about. And last year we framed that theologically and in terms of social justice around the issues of hunger and poverty. And this booklet, which I left copies for this year, made copies for this year, is in this booklet. I encourage you to take a look at what we did in Washington. It will help you with the seminar for this week. And here we had amazing Pan-African women of faith leading us. Some of you were there. And we went to Capitol Hill. We did. We went to Capitol Hill, and unlike popular perception, Capitol Hill is about all of our agenda, no matter where you are in the world, because it is the U.S. Congress that spends the dollars or not in terms of many of the resources we have in the global economy. And so we went straight to the leaders who make those decisions. We met in the halls of the Congress. We were hosted by Senator Tim Scott. We were hosted by Congressman Andre Carson, actually one of my congressional leaders personally. And we sat in those rooms, and we actually preached the word in one of the hearing rooms. Yes, Bishop Snorton did that, yes. And so here we speak about that moment of advocacy. It was in Washington, but it was about international advocacy. And this section talks about that background. Okay, we go further in terms of the next section. You can read the details for yourself. Many of you may have already done that. But the recognition of storytelling within our traditions. We are oral and literal people. And stories matter in our context. And so this week we will share our stories. We will share our narratives to create that larger narrative, or if you could say add on to the larger narrative and to this situation of pilgrimage. And then we talk about that PAWEEN is not unto itself. It is part of the church's movement. It is part of the worldwide church family. And that because of that, our story needs to be told wherever the story of Christ is being told. And so we speak a bit here about that. And then finally, we also talk about the role of governments, which I just talked about. All of us live in countries where there are governments who say they are in charge. They are accountable to you. And some of us miss that opportunity. Intergovernmental agencies and governmental agencies within our countries need to know that Pan-African women are standing up and holding our leaders accountable. Holding our leaders accountable for what they do and what they don't do. And so we talk about governments here, and that's part of the social justice vision that we have. Just quickly, a quick word about WCC history and Pan-African Women of Faith. Already we've said quite a bit about that, but one of the women that I want to lift up that I've identified in my research, I've been very blessed over the years to have researched about 25 women of African descent or African identity since the beginnings of the ecumenical movement, which is early in the 1900s, but particularly focusing in since 1935 to 1980. That's been the focus of my work. And one of the women that comes to mind is the Reverend Dr. Rita Karifa Smart. Any of you know this name? Ah, okay. So, in Evanston, there was someone, at every assembly, there was someone who writes the liturgies of the assemblies. It doesn't just happen. I mean, everybody talks about the worship experiences at the assemblies. It just doesn't just happen because you just show up and, you know, everybody just is led by the Spirit. In World Council of Circles, everything is written out in all the languages, because we have a language question. And I apologize that we don't have that for this time together. Normally, we would have 4 or 5 languages translated during the time of our meetings, but we want to thank our sisters whose mother tongue is not English for allowing English to dominate this conversation. But there was a woman, her name was the Reverend Dr. Rita Karifa Smart, a woman of African descent who actually was born in the Caribbean, but then she conducted her ministry in the United States and she married a Sierra Leone. So she was truly Pan-African in her identity. She is an AME Zion woman, African Methodist Episcopal Zion woman. And Rena is the one who wrote the liturgies for Evanston. That was Rena, a woman of African descent. These are the kinds of stories that I've been digging up in my research of these women who are behind the scenes or who have not been given the kind of glory or edification at the center of Christian life. I have looked at her notes between the people who were the officials, who were primarily male and not of African identity. I have looked at their correspondence back to her. And it's very interesting, as you might imagine, to see what she was pushing for versus what the World Council was pushing for. So early, there are many other stories I can share, but this is one of many. And so we are coming to help open up these stories. And you have many of those stories in your countries, in your places. We want to look at the stories that have not been told. That's part of our World Council of Churches history, but we'll see more as we move along. Okay, the journey to and with PAWEEN at the Ecumenical Movement for and with PAWEEN. There will be struggles along the way, as you can imagine. Just as I said about Dominique Tabarro, who stood up at that meeting and said, this meeting is coming to order. But we have always been there. And so I just want to emphasize again, this is a journey, and we're on the shoulders of those who've gone before us. Now, the rubrics of the Pilgrimage of Justice and Peace and PAWEEN. So these are three. We want to name them because that's how this week has been framed. One, again, coming out of Norway with the theological framing of the overall journey of the Pilgrimage of Justice and Peace. One is the positiva. That is, what are the celebrations? What are the things that are uplifting to our spirit? Where are the stories being told that take us and empower us and inspire us to go forward? These are the things that we would say the celebrations or the positives, the places where we have exercised agency. Then the second one is what they're saying, the negativa, the things that are not so, are challenging to us, that are difficult for us. In fact, the wounds, the things that have pained us. And so we speak of the struggles of being Christian as women of African ancestry. So that's the second rubric. Then the third one is through the celebrations, through the spirit, through the positives. We also have the struggles, but on the other side, there is transformation. But we know as women of African descent, both are our reality. And even as we sit at this very privileged, sacred space, we know that it is our sisters, it is our daughters, it is our grandparents who today are in the refugee camps today, who are hungry, who are living in poverty. It is not over there. It is our story. Many of us have our own personal stories of coming through the struggles, coming through the pain. I am the first woman in my family on my father's side to graduate from college. My father's side still is in the ghettos and the most impoverished areas of the United States in Cleveland, Ohio, in the streets of Cleveland. My mother's side comes from the rural farming communities of the South. I am truly rural and urban and was raised in the Midwest. But I always was in Alabama on the farm, on the land, where we have some inheritance, thanks be to God, because my family fought for it and bought it with their labors as sharecroppers and bought their own land from their own father, who was a mulatto, well, someone of mixed race. So all of us have our own struggles, our own pain, and we want to invite that into this space. Many of you are probably the first, like I have been, on my father's side. This is a space where that story is welcome, to inform the wider family of the church that yes, to be Christian is to struggle. To be Christian is to celebrate. To be Christian is to fight for that which is just and not to accept answers that are not acceptable. That is why we are PAWEEN. And this is why we come together. You are welcome in this space to tell your story. But to engage it theologically, engage it in terms of the vision of justice and peace, and to say to the rest of the family, our story is your story. And your story is our story, because we believe Christ is our gift of salvation.
I would like to continue a little bit and share what we have thought would be the continuation of the process that we have launched, particularly related to what we would like to do together with you in this seminar and speak to the purpose of this PAWEEN seminar. As Angelique just said, it's about hearing your stories, exchanging on these, and emphasizing that these stories matter. And we hope, of course, that we will also be able to expand the network. So far, we have been working with a small core group. We have been organizing these events in the past 2 years, but our hope is that we will be able to enlarge this movement of PAWEEN. And the second objective is also to develop together with you this concept and this rationale around the theological structure of via positiva, via negativa, and via transformativa. How are we going to celebrate together the gifts of Pan-African women in the ecumenical movement? How are we going to translate what we struggle for and what we experienced as pains and wounds? And last not least, how are we able to transform from against this background our realities and our societies? I think that is a very important point. Most of the time we see that it stops with going through via positiva and via negativa. But what we want to do is, in fact, to go a step further and say, we have the resources in ourselves. Pan-African women are not just recipients of something that comes externally to transform them and their environments, but it's within us. And this is the source of the transformation that we are aiming at. Therefore, the attempt has been to design this seminar in consistency with this structure. And you will see in our program that we have developed the panels around these 3 stages. We will begin with the first panel around agency and resilience. A second one around the theme of celebrating our gifts. A third one will be dedicated to the historic wounds. And we have heard, and we all are somehow related to these historic wounds. It's in our skin. We embody that. We've heard that since yesterday. A fourth panel will then be about the contemporary wounds, because we cannot see the historic wounds without connecting them to what are the pains that we have with structures that are related to injustice. And last not least, we would like to speak with you about transformation and hope. What are these concrete resources, and what are the tools, what are the strategies, what are the avenues that we can develop together in order to bring about transformation and change, particularly with regards to certain structures. And we hope that what we develop will be something that resonates with your experience and your expertise. And therefore your stories and your experience will be uplifted, will be highlighted in the panels and in the working groups that we organized according to the theological structure. What I also would like to mention, which is very important also for the work we are carrying out in our department on theological education, is that we would like to offer encouragement for the younger generation to continue to be engaged and committed in the ecumenical movement and to put their commitments into concrete action. We believe what we fail to do in that respect today will have an effect on the future of the ecumenical movement. That's why we try to frame our work in ecumenical theological education as an ecumenical leadership development program. We believe that the youth, the young theologians, are the future. And one of the emphases in our work are on the encouragement of women, particularly young women. We have launched this year a women's mentoring program. And we had a very successful, I believe, meeting in Asia earlier this year, where we built a platform of women theologians from Asia and Africa with regard to this aspect of mentoring. How can we promote women to assume leadership positions in church, in academia, in the wider society? We think that around leadership, role modeling, and transmission, we have very important tasks to do. But this is not a task that we can achieve alone. Our sister Fulata can tell many stories and has many experiences around this. Her own program is framed in this sense that it is about the construction of just communities of women and men. And that's why it is so important that we understand what we want to do in this seminar and in PAWEEN as a whole, something that is not restricted to women alone, but it reaches out, or it expands to the wider society, to the community as a whole. We also want to gather and collect voices and stories. That's why we have in our program also the open paper session, because we believe that it's not only important to exchange and to have this verbal communication, but we want also to leave traces of our work together. And that's why we want to speak with you about the possibility of having a common publication project. And we want to begin with that in this seminar. The open paper session will be the beginning of this project of ours. I think that is, for the moment, what I would like to share on that. Angélique continues.
So, sisters, we have an ambitious agenda, but I know you are more than up for the task. You are becoming more refreshed from your rest on last night and the prayers that are energizing. So, the concrete outcomes. When you do advocacy work, justice work, you have to have clear objectives. So you could go back and measure, did you accomplish what you did or not? And certainly at Bread for the World, we're very clear on this point. So I agree with that. So what exactly are we seeking to achieve this week? Given what you have just heard as the framing, the background, the papers, you've heard already one of the objectives, one of them is, of course, the publication project. Now, we are hoping each one of you will not only give the oral stories in this sacred space, but you will take it upon yourself to be scholars. If you're not already a scholar, there are already scholars in the room. But we're very serious about this matter. We do come under the Theological Education Commission. The commission will be meeting in Romania in October already. We will be reporting out to the outcomes of PAWEEN over these past few years to the commission. Dr. Mambo is here. I think, where is Esther? There she is. Our great leader is in the house. So they will hear about what our concrete outcomes and takeaways have been. Now, we already have some from Washington already. You look in here, you'll see more about what those outcomes were. There is actually a report that was done that I sent to those that were in attendance. It's a lovely report. It was published at Bread for the World. It's very nice, and it tells you exactly what we accomplished in Washington. By the way, sisters, I will say to you, on-site is good for funding. Keep that in mind. Part of the reason why we don't get funded and resources is because we don't report. We don't hold ourselves accountable and share it so that we have the data. Yeah, you know this word. The data to show that what we have done has mattered. Okay? Now, if you look to this week again, you will find that there are other things that we're seeking to accomplish. This week, we are also seeking to accomplish a message. Now, this comes straight out of World Council of Churches protocols. At every every assembly, can you turn around now? The assemblies, in fact, one year I was on the message committee, and we actually made it into a prayer, and it actually made the headlines. A prayer made the headlines. But anyway, a message that comes out of the assembly. In other words, when the assembly meets, there's a word to the public about why we gathered, why it mattered that we were together. And I had the great opportunity to serve on that when I think it was in Zimbabwe that I was serving on that message committee. We want a message from this group. That is to say, why did this matter? What did we do? Why do our stories matter? What difference does it make? And we need some people to work on that task force. Now, I'm going to tell you, as I said from my immersion by fire when I was in Australia, it's going to take a few more hours than when we gather to get that done, but we're committed to that. So we need some volunteers to work with us to come up with our message and as to why this all mattered and to get that out publicly. We also, again, the Writing and Publications Project, but we also are Voices for Advocacy. So we are going to do what we do at Bread for the World, which is an offering of letters. How many of you write your governmental leaders? Oh, I got a few in the room. How many of you know your governmental leaders? A few in the room. How many of you even care about governmental leaders? Okay, in this forum, you're going to care about that, okay? I come out of the U.S. context, but wherever your leader is in your particular province or in your particular community, who is your leader for your country, who are the leaders in your region, maybe Africa, maybe North America, we're going to name them. Because if you don't know them, you need to name them. And we want you to send a letter to them and to let them know what you care about. The offering of letters at Bread for the World is when we say there are specific policies that matter in our life. Right now, we are fighting for a just moral budget in the United States. And believe me, that has everything to do with everybody in this room. Because they are talking about slashing international humanitarian aid. They are talking about slashing feeding programs and other programs that matter to people of African descent around the world. And all of us, not U.S., all of us in the world will feel that. All of us. PEPFAR, which has been funded in millions of dollars and led by the executive orders of the president, before Obama, back to Bush. We thank actually President Bush for PEPFAR. All of that is being discussed as being slashed. USAID programs, some of you may be benefiting from projects in your communities that are funded by USAID. And the thing about the U.S. government, when the U.S. government gets behind it, other funders may come along. So we're going to talk about that a little bit during this week And we're going to try to put together some letters and to help you name who your leaders are and to hold them accountable. So that's another outcome. Another outcome will be taking it home, making a list of what you are going to take back home when you leave here. This is not about Bossey. This is not even about World Council. This is about what you're going to do when you get back home. Are you going to write an op-ed in your newspaper? I was with the World Council of Churches. I was with Bossey. I was with PAWEEN, and this is what matters when I come back home. Are you going to engage this with other women who you're working with in your churches, in your community, around some of the things that benefited you this week? We're going to invite you to make a list about what you plan to do when you get back home, to come up with a plan. The next steps will be looking at the CWME conference, where, as I said, we have Joseph here. He will present to us and give us an understanding about that. We want you to understand what's going to happen at that meeting, why that's important in the life of the churches. Also, the Central Committee will be meeting next year. So not only will we be reporting back to the commission that happens in Romania this year, we'll be reporting back also to the Central Committee next year, wherever we're meeting, which is not clear to me at the moment. We also are in conversation with the WCA. That's another movement of women, and that has had a historic place of providing leadership of women of African descent. And then also we want to think a bit about the next assembly, which will take place in 2020, thereabouts. So these are the kind of takeaways and considerations we want to make as we are here together, as things we take back home and engage. I will also say, my hope and prayer would be also that we can begin to think about regional conversations that will come out of this. Regions, continent of Africa, say North America, I mean, the World Council talks about it in terms of geography, in terms of those kinds of things. But we can also talk about that in terms of confessions as well. We're very happy that we have different confessions that are here, from quote, historic churches to Orthodox churches, Catholics are in the house. Pentecostal, evangelical. I come out of the historic black churches in the United States, National Baptist Convention, USA Incorporated. But we have all of these different families. So we might think about how we organize ourselves around our confessional identities and also around our regional identities. So thank you for that.
Thank you.